is sound feedback, which occurs when an earpiece is worn too close to a microphone. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do our best to maintain a consolidated order of speaking for all members. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee proceeds to hear from officials on a briefing on the situation in Israel and Gaza. I'd like to welcome our distinguished witnesses. We're very fortunate to have here before us Mr. Alexander Levesque, who of course is the Assistant Deputy Minister for Europe, Arctic, Middle East, and Maghreb. We also have Mr. Louis Martin Omey, the Director General and Deputy Legal Advisor for Public International Law Bureau. Lastly, we have Mr. Sébastien Beaulieu, the Director General and Chief Security Officer, and he is with the Security and Emergency Management Office. So, as I understand, there's one opening remarks. Is that correct? Okay. So you have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, Mr. Levesque. Thank you for being here. And we will now give you the floor and run the clock. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, thank you again for the invitation to brief the committee today on events in Israel, the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank. The situation has evolved substantially since my last appearance in December. My remarks today will focus on how the conflict is evolving and on Canada's response. Before I begin, I would like to briefly address the motion adopted by this committee on February 12, 2024, regarding the production of papers on Canada's military exports permits to Israel. The Department provided a package on March 13th, last week, in response to this motion. We look forward to working with you to ensure the smooth delivery of documents to support the committee in its study. For Canada, it remains clear that a sustainable ceasefire is necessary to finding a path towards securing lasting peace for Israelis and Palestinians. Of course, such a ceasefire cannot be one-sided. Hamas must lay down its arms and release all hostages. There is growing international consensus around the urgent need for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Canada continues to monitor negotiations led by the U.S., Egypt, and Qatar towards this end. Foreign Affairs Minister Joly recently visited the Middle East, which allowed her to witness firsthand the effects this conflict has had and continues to have on Israelis, on Palestinians, and indeed on the broader region. The
minister met with her counterparts, as well as several officials and organizations. She reaffirmed that the allegations of conflict-related sexual violence against women in Israel and Gaza must be the subject of an investigation and that the perpetrators of those acts must be held responsible. The Minister of International Development, Hussein, has also been very involved, as evidenced by his visits to Jordan and Egypt, specifically to Rafah, in order to assess the impact of Canada's humanitarian assistance. The government continues to underscore that we support Israel's right under international law to defend itself against Hamas's terrorist acts. All actors must respect humanitarian international law, which includes allowing the unhindered delivery of humanitarian assistance to those who need it.
Month, alongside his counterparts from Australia and New Zealand, Canada is gravely concerned by Israel's planned military offensive on the city of Rafah. This would risk catastrophic consequences for the approximately 1.5 million Palestinians taking refuge in the area. Rafah remains the main entry point for humanitarian aid going into Gaza, and Canada continues to urge the Israeli government not to go down this path. The need for consistent humanitarian assistance in Gaza has never been greater. It is clear much more is needed to address the urgent humanitarian needs of Palestinians. Canada remains one of the largest contributors of humanitarian and development assistance to vulnerable Palestinians, with contributions of $100 million in the past year to address the current crisis in Gaza.
Following the serious allegations that employees of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency better known as UNRWA, were involved in the terrorist attacks by Hamas against Israel on the 7th of October 2023, Canada decided to temporarily suspend its funding to that organization at the end of January. In response to those allegations, the UN implemented several important and rigorous processes and procedures to examine these allegations and reinforce zero tolerance with respect to terrorism in the UN, including UNRWA. Canada examined the interim report that the Office of Internal Oversight produced and looks forward to the final report. Canada is also pleased with the independent review on the part of UNRWA, as well as what it is doing to strengthen monitoring, accountability, and transparency. UNRWA also plays an essential and unavoidable role in Gaza by providing humanitarian assistance to more than 2 million individuals, besides its critical activities that support 4 million individuals in the region. And that is why Canada removed the temporary suspension of its funding to UNRWA.
As the only way for Israel to achieve long-term security and recognition in the region. Canada stands ready to keep supporting the Palestinian Authority in its revitalization efforts and to work with its new technocratic government, once formed, towards implementing governance reforms. I will stop here. We look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Levesque. Now, before we get into questioning, does everyone want to run till 5:30 with questions, or do we want to set aside 15 minutes at the end from 5:15 to 5:30 for committee business?
Monsieur le Président, on va être d'accord avec...
Chair, we agree with reserving 15 minutes for committee business. Thank you.
We will have questions till 5:15, after which we will, it's not very much time, but we will go into committee business. So we will start off with 4-minute questions, and we start off with Mr. Epp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. In October, our Foreign Affairs Minister delivered a speech to the Economic Club of Canada, which called for the humanitarian truce, as well as the release of hostages. But a few days later, Canada abstained from voting on the resolution, or a resolution at the United Nations that called for that humanitarian truce. How is Canada's lack of a commitment to a coherent foreign policy affecting the outcome, affecting the ongoing tragedy that's unfolding in Gaza?
I would provide on this is the latest position the government has made on this goes back to December 12th, when the government pronounced itself on promoting and advocating for ceasefire in the region. We were among the first countries, if not the most, or the first country among like-minded to make that pronouncement. I cannot speak to what other pronouncements before the minister might have made, but the position since December 12th is very clear, and the government has been consistent in calling for a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza.
So if the government has landed on that position now, I mean, the IRGC has supported and funded Hamas, which created or is behind a lot of the sadistic violence and the murder of innocent civilians, including many Canadians. So why has Canada not nailed then and identified the IRGC as a terrorist entity because of the additional evidence now playing out in Gaza?
Well, thank you. The number of tools at the government's disposal to put pressure on Iran and to make Iran accountable for its actions in the region is obviously very wide. The state of Iran is already listed as a state sponsor of terrorism. As for decisions that could be made in the future regarding to the IRGC, again, this is a decision the government will make. I'm here to explain what the government hasn't done yet.
You stated that they are looking for a way to list the IRGC in a responsible manner. But is not listing them not irresponsible? Sorry for using so many double negatives, but I mean, he's saying he wants a responsible way to list them. Why is that not happening?
It's a policy decision, Mr. Chair. I couldn't speak for the Prime Minister on this. What we are there to do is provide options. We do provide these options to the government and for them to make policy decisions.
Allowing them to continue to exist, your colleagues from finance have identified that up to $100 billion of Iranian funds are being snow-washed here in Canada through money laundering schemes, which is funding terrorism. So would that not be enough? Is there not enough evidence to pursue that path?
I mean, a lot of sanctions are in place to help put pressure on Iran. You would be familiar with those. We have, I forget the exact number, but hundreds of IRGC officials listed already, and our sanctions regime is designed precisely to address what you're referring to.
So how does UNRWA fit in then, when they are basically part or members of UNRWA? Have been identified as part of the Hamas terrorists. So how does UNRWA fit in with the IRGC?
UNRWA is a UN organization guided by UN rules. It employs 33,000 people, 13,000 in Gaza alone. And the allegations that were made were on initially 11 or 12 individuals. What we saw immediately was UNRWA take measures to suspend these individuals. Ever since that, a number of measures have been taken by UNRWA itself to review its processes, to review its clearing of employees' processes. The UN headquarters, led by the Secretary General, have put measures in place. We've been briefed on an interim report that the Office of Control of the UN has written. So what we can see is that immediate measures were taken. The bad apples, if you will, the negative elements were fired, and this is to allow the organization that is absolutely essential to humanitarian assistance in Gaza to continue to operate.
There has been enough
Thank
evidence.
you, Mr. Epp. We're at 4:40. My apologies. We next go to Mr. Zuberi. 4 minutes, Mr. Zuberi.
I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here, Mr. Levesque and your team. I would like to touch upon the minister's recent trip to Israel, the West Bank, and the region. And I took note of a number of tweets and social media posts, some accomplishments of the minister's trip. They included two announcements, one both related to protecting the rights of women from sexual and gender-based violence. And the first tweet that I saw said that Canada is giving $1 million to support the victims of sexual-based violence on October 7. And another tweet said, and that tweet was very clear who were the aggressors, Hamas. And in a second tweet I read, it said that Canada is giving $1 million to support Palestinian women who are the victims of sexual and gender-based violence. But I was unclear about who is actually the alleged party for committing these crimes, and where are the monies going in each of the two $1 million tranches.
Mr. Chair, I can address this. I had the pleasure of accompanying Minister Joly on her trip to the Middle East, was part of those meetings. And I can say this was actually addressed quite at length in a roundtable with women's rights advocates, particularly experts on sexual and gender-based violence, with the First Lady of Israel, and then the follow-on conversation with President Herzog of Israel. First of all, on your first question, allegations have been made. You're right about the atrocities committed on October 7, clearly by Hamas. There's a lot of evidence that points towards the sexual crimes that were committed, and so the $1 million that has been set aside to help Israeli women, survivors, and just the support for recovery counseling, etc., is clearly identified. There have also been allegations made of sexual and or gender-based violence towards Palestinian women, not with as direct an attribution. But the position of the minister on this is that when a woman comes forward and makes such allegations, we should believe the woman first and foremost, and investigate, always investigate. So the money, the second announcement that was made was to be in support of these women, but of course allegations will need to be pursued and investigations will need to be done.
So we have no idea who committed those sexual crimes of sexual violence. We have no idea.
And there's no precision yet.
Okay, that's helpful. In terms of UNRWA, just to set the record straight, my understanding is that and the dates, I don't have them in front of me, but Minister Hussein announced that we would be pausing future funding to UNRWA more recently in March, and that was December 6th. If I remember, don't take my date here, but several weeks ago, if not months, Minister Hussein announced that we would pause funding to UNRWA, future funding, because of allegations of 12 employees that were involved in October 7 attacks. More recently, in March, Minister Hussein unpaused the future installment. So just to be very clear, in terms of, and I'm not asking on that specific issue, but on the issue, because I think there's a lack of clarity in Canada and for Canadians about our humanitarian aid to Gaza in this conflict. We, in my understanding, never actually, we did pause future payments, but that payment was not due until a point when, until a future date. So in reality, to support humanitarian endeavors, we have increased funding, and the funding for UNRWA was never cut, although there was we were going to do so if we did get down to the issue. Is that correct? So we did increase.
Over time, it's now 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Thank you. So we next go to Madame Normandin. You have 4 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the witnesses for coming today. Thank you, Mr. Lebec, for your commitment to providing the documents that were sent to the committee. However, I would like to comment that on the 6th of December last, the committee asked for written answers on the voting process within the United States and on export permits, and we're still awaiting answers to our questions. Now, my first question today has to do with the blockade. Israel has imposed a blockade on essential goods since the beginning of the conflict, and resources only go in occasionally through Rafah. Now, the Department of Foreign Affairs has never said that Israeli actions on this violated international law, despite the famine that is resulting from this. So I'd like to know what the current position is of the department. Are these actions a breach of international law? Well, I'll begin by your first comment. You have my personal commitment to come back to you with this if questions were asked on the 6th of December that were not answered. So I can assure you that we will provide that as quickly as possible. Now, in terms of Canada's position on humanitarian assistance in Gaza, regardless of the words that are used to describe the current situation, this current situation is dramatic and unprecedented. The human suffering is unprecedented, and we must do everything in our power in order to facilitate the delivery of essential goods, whether it be via road or other. And our position is that Israel should open as many roads as it can in order to get that humanitarian aid to Gaza. We've also been doing airdrops through Jordan, or contributing rather, and we have contributed as well to the maritime corridor established between Cyprus and Gaza. So it's on all those levels that we are acting and that we want to support. Well, you're not necessarily confirming that there is a violation of international law, but my second question is this. In November, following Hamas's actions, the government expressed its hope that Israel would be restrained in its response. Do you feel that Israel has had a restrained response, whether it did or is currently? Well, that's a question of how you interpret what is happening and how you describe what is happening. The violence that has taken place has had a huge humanitarian impact. And we are exerting pressure on many levels, whether it be working groups, ministerial levels, etc., within Israel, in fact, to make sure that as much restraint as possible is exerted, because these are dramatic circumstances. More can be done. Now, in terms of Israel's actions, has the Minister of Foreign Affairs already drawn a red line that must not be crossed? I wouldn't necessarily say that any of these steps are a red line, except that there have been fundamental principles that have been outlined. And so I understand that there will not be a red line that is established. Well, not one that has been formulated as such yet.
To MP McGregor, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Levesque, I just want to run through the numbers to ensure I have them correct. Did you say it was 7 employees from UNRWA who were implicated in the interim report?
I believe it was 12.
Sorry, 12. Okay, and that's out of a total organization strength of around 30,000?
33,000 overall, 13,000 in Gaza.
The leader of the opposition recently referred to UNRWA as a terrorist organization. Does Global Affairs Canada feel it's reasonable to hold an organization that employs 33,000 people accountable for the actions of 12 of its members? Does the department share the view that that's the correct terminology to use in this case?
The department considers UNRWA to be a UN organization or sub-body that belongs to the UN family.
Is the is the department aware of any of our major allies that hold that view, holding the entire UNRWA organization accountable for the actions of 12 of its employees?
Not that I'm aware of. No other country has referred to UNRWA as a terrorist organization.
Thank you for getting that on the record. Human Rights Watch has argued that the demise of UNRWA would be catastrophic for Gaza. Does the government of Canada share that view? And to add some context, how do you place UNRWA in terms of its ability to deliver aid to the people of Gaza?
We believe that UNRWA is an absolutely essential organization in the current context to be able to deliver humanitarian assistance to people in grave need in Gaza, not just because of the internal networks that they run to be able to deliver humanitarian assistance, but because they are also the organization that other humanitarian actors use inside Gaza. The World Food Program could not deliver its food to Gazans if it wasn't for UNRWA. UNICEF could not reach the children they need to reach if it wasn't for UNRWA. So it is an organization that is really the backbone of humanitarian assistance in Gaza.
And to be clear, when you're talking about grave need, we're referring to catastrophic destruction of necessary infrastructure, lack of access to medical supplies, to food, to basic shelter. Am I correct in outlining those?
That would be
Very
correct.
broadly. Thank you. You mentioned in your opening statements about Israel's right to defend itself, and I think everyone around this committee understands that right that is afforded to any nation state around the world. I guess what I want you to help me understand is in the destruction that's going on in Gaza and the catastrophe that we're all witnessing day by day that's happening and being inflicted on the Palestinian people that live there. At what point does the government of Canada's understanding of the right to defend itself transition? Is Israel still meeting that defined right to defend itself with the destruction that's going on in Gaza right now?
What I would say, Mr. Chair, is that Israel really is at war right now. It is at war with Hamas. I can tell you, having stood 3 kilometers from the border with Gaza, that I could hear gunfire, automatic rifles going off. That's not civilians fighting the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. That is a terrorist organization. We could hear artillery fire going in. So that war really is happening right now. It continues. The position of the government, and certainly the analysis of the department, is that maximum restraint, consideration for civilian life must be a consideration at all time. And we've seen phenomenal destruction, grave human suffering that we have called out and said numerous times that should be reduced, should be brought to on both sides. The violence has to stop. It is very difficult to give you an exact measure, but the trend and generally what Canadians and what this government has advocated for is a lowering of the temperature, is lessening of violence, and is increased consideration for civilians and human life in Gaza.
We next go to MP Chong. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Canada's long-standing, many decades-long position has been to recognize the State of Israel, with which we've had diplomatic relations for decades. It's also been our long-standing position not to recognize the State of Palestine, but to recognize that state if it culminates as the result of negotiations between the State of Israel and the Palestinian people. Does the Government of Canada believe it's time to change that long-standing position and to immediately recognize the State of Palestine?
Thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, this is obviously a policy decision that will need to be made by the Minister and the Prime Minister speaking as representatives of the government. What I can tell you from the department's side is that the position has been and remains that the only way forward out of this conflict ultimately is by having two states living side by side. The recognition of a Palestinian state at some point in the continuum, we believe, should happen. If you look at the Oslo Accord, the final stage was
Agreed.
supposed to be the recognition of the Palestinian state.
So at some point, a continuum presumably excludes at the beginning of the continuum.
It can be anywhere in the continuum. I think what is important is
So the process should start with the recognition of a Palestinian state?
not necessarily,
Okay.
but there is a continuum there.
Yeah, but the advice from the department, I assume, is not to begin with the recognition of a Palestinian state, but rather to have the two parties sit down through the difficult process of negotiations, and perhaps at some point along that continuum, as you call it, potentially recognize a Palestinian state. Is that the advice, as I understand it?
The advice of the department is, of course, protected and has to go to the minister that I cannot disclose in this committee hearing.
Okay, fair enough. I have a question related to humanitarian aid for Palestinians in Gaza. Recently, the El Mathia initiative was announced. Canada isn't part of that initiative, which is to use naval transport, maritime transport, to carry aid from Cyprus to the Gaza Strip. Why isn't Canada part of this initiative?
Mr. Chair, Canada has announced that it would be part of this initiative and will contribute and is in talks right now.
But I guess why weren't we part of the joint statement? And if we are going to be at some point part of the initiative, what assets are we bringing to bear to be part of the initiative?
Right. Well, that's exactly what's being discussed right now. I think in the first instance, it will be in supply of actual humanitarian goods to be loaded on ships leaving from Cyprus. And we're in discussion with the key actors, Cyprus, the United Arab Emirates, the Israeli government, the Americans, to see how we can best insert ourselves in that supply.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We next go to MP Chattel. You have 3 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to our colleagues from Global Affairs Canada for coming today. We all understand that this is a war and that it is very difficult. There's no such thing as an easy war. However, there are rules during wars, and one of those rules under the Vienna Convention states that we must protect civilians under all circumstances, those who are innocent. Currently, you have describe this as this inhumane situation. There are thousands of residents of Gaza who are dying, and this is not acceptable. It's not acceptable anywhere. Protecting civilians is our responsibility. It's a responsibility of all. Now, humanitarian assistance also has to be delivered. And that brings me to my question. A maritime corridor has been opened along with the United States and allies such as the UK. And it was proposed that there be this maritime corridor. But one of the questions is that the UN has stated, and you confirmed this, that the best way to deliver this assistance is via road. However, we know that because of Netanyahu's actions, there has been an obstruction of this way of delivering assistance. So, do you not think that perhaps deciding on a maritime corridor where it's kind of overshadowing the importance of a road route or a land route? Well, I would say that the two aren't mutually exclusive. What I would say is that in all our exchanges, at all levels with the Israeli government, we never miss an opportunity to affirm that we all have a collective responsibility here, including the Israeli government. They have a responsibility to ensure minimum services, whether that be food or medical supplies. They have a responsibility to ensure that delivery. And that's why we've participated. We've contributed into these airdrops to the maritime corridor, because there is this extraordinary need on the part of the residents of Gaza. That said, I would say the best way, the most efficient way to get the best impact for cost is to deliver this humanitarian aid via truck on roads. There are many entry points into Gaza. Rafah is the one that is being mainly used, but there are at least 3 or 4 others. And we will continue to hammer this point home, whether it be with Israel or along with other partners at the highest levels. So I just want to be sure I understood. Pressure is being made on the Israeli government to open up these entry points. Thank you.
Go to Madame Normandin. You have a minute and a half.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'd like to speak about permit exports for military equipment. We know that since October 7th, only non-lethal equipment has been granted permits, and we have learned that there has been a slowdown in the process of issuing permits. But I would like to know if any of those permits have been refused, and on what grounds were those export permits refused or denied. Unfortunately, I can't go into the details of every request for these permits. First of all, because there is a judicial review that is ongoing. So I do not want to interfere with that process, and for that reason I cannot go into the details of this. But you are right in saying that since the 8th of January, no permits have been issued.
We now go to Mr. McGregor. You have a minute and a half as well.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Mr. Levesque, the President of the United States has publicly referred to the intolerable levels of extremist settler violence, forced displacement of people in villages, and property destruction in the West Bank. Our own Minister of Foreign Affairs has announced that she would like to follow the United States example in sanctions. Can you please update this committee on whether those sanctions are going ahead, and what criteria and methods of investigation the government is using to identify extremist settlers and the violence that are being perpetrated on Palestinians in the West Bank?
Thank you. Again, without wanting to preempt decisions that the government might take, I can say that sanctions on extremist settlers is under active consideration, and it is an option that is being pursued at this time. as you probably know, our sanctions regime demands that we use open source information in order to identify which individuals or entities to list under our sanctions regime, something that we have pursued in this case. I should note that a number of extremist settlers have actually been found guilty of such aggressions by the Israeli government itself. So at the very least, there is a base of information there that we can use, in addition to wider sources that remain open source. Having been in the West Bank just a few days ago and been surrounded by those illegal settlements, I would say that there's enough body of evidence to be able to link the most extreme members in a relatively easy way.
Thank you very much. That concludes our questions. At this point, I'd like to thank Mr. Levesque, Mr. Omey, and Monsieur Beaulieu. Very, very grateful for your time and your expertise and perspectives. We will now adjourn the meeting for a few minutes. Suspend the meeting for a few minutes, and then come back for in-camera committee business for approximately 15 minutes. Thank you.